Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Nancy, and thank you to the Atrus Network for inviting us to be part of this session today. And hello to everybody joining online. You may have been able to connect with some of the other Healing Arts Scotland events that have been happening this week. However, if you are joining for the first time, then welcome. We hope you're having a wonderful week, and we're looking forward very much to this rich discussion. We have some amazing panelists as part of this discussion today, who we'll hear a little bit more from shortly. I would like to introduce the panel, just very top line, first of all, before we give an overview of what we are going to be learning and exploring a little bit more about today. We are expecting one other person potentially to join the panel. However, I would suggest in the best interest of time that we continue, that we make a start, and if Willie joins us, then we will welcome him at that point as well. But my role is Senior Dance Health Manager at Scottish Ballet, as outlined by Nancy. And I'd love to introduce now David Leventhal, who is in the room with us in person, joining from New York as part of Healing Arts Scotland. We're delighted to have David here. And David is the pioneer of the global Dance for Parkinson's movement and model and structure and framework, having trained over 2,000 people. Okay, sorry. Having trained over 2,500 artists to deliver the Dance for PD model and framework all across the globe, across many continents. David, lovely to have you with us. Can you give us a little bit of a top line information of your role?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's great to be here. Thank you for this invitation and opportunity to share and exchange. I've been working with people with Parkinson's for almost 23 years. And the program started really with the objective of inviting people living with Parkinson's to experience the joys and benefits of dance as an art form, as a physicalized practice that engages mind, body, and spirit in one. And we've been working to that effect since 2001. Working as much as we can to really function both in the artistic space and train, as you said, train teaching artists to facilitate this work in 30 countries around the world, but also to build partnerships and collaborations that foster research, that develop partnerships with healthcare professionals, with allied health professionals, that includes physiotherapists, occupational therapists, to bring in other partners that might include government agencies, it might include industry partners, to really build a network of support for people with Parkinson's through dance. Dance is one of the most powerful modalities for people living with Parkinson's because it is multifocal and because Parkinson's is multifocal. A lot of times, and we were talking about this a little bit before, we began this this presentation or this conversation. Oftentimes I think Parkinson's is categorized as a biomedical condition, but it is, but I would argue it's a biopsychosocial challenge in that it affects all aspects of a person's life, not just physical and motor realities, but also mental health, mental well-being, relationships, the way that people see themselves in the world. So identity is impacted. And so that's, I think, a place where the arts can be so impactful because, yes, dance is a wonderful motor training modality where we're training the body to do certain things over time, but it's also a profound means of expression and storytelling and relationship building. And all of that is essential when you're living with Parkinson's. My friend and colleague, Dave Iverson, who's a filmmaker and somebody living with Parkinson's, talks about Parkinson's. And I think you could apply this to a number of neurodegenerative conditions. It talks about Parkinson's as a condition of subtraction. So over time, it takes away physical skills. It takes away the ability to express emotions through face and voice. It takes away relationships that you may have had through work, through other circles. And so I think the arts play a huge role in adding back in a number of those elements in an accessible and inclusive way. So that's sort of the top line view of what we do and why we believe in what we do.
Thank you so much. And you made so many interesting points that we'll come back to and we'll unpick a little bit further, particularly around what arts can restore and bring back almost in some aspects, but also around identity. Some really important points around identity that we'd love to come back to shortly. Welcome, Willie Gilder. I'd love to hand over to you next, Willie, to say a little bit about your background, Willie, and where you are joining us from today.
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Willie Gilder. I am from the Midlands originally, and I now live in Edinburgh. I've lived here for 3 years, and 3 years ago I was diagnosed with the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. My particular form of Alzheimer's affects the parietal lobes, which are at the top of the head. Generally, Alzheimer's starts in the hippocampus at the back of the head, so it affects memory. One of the other things that the parietal lobes control is the ability to paint and to draw, and that's something that I have done all through my life. But I completely lost my skills at painting and drawing, and seemingly lost all my interest in painting and drawing at the same sort of time as I was being diagnosed. Now, I kind of, from somewhere, knew about the therapeutic power of music, and particularly the music you grew up with, personally meaningful music. I was a 60s child. Where I grew up in Suffolk on the East Coast. We were 6 miles away from Radio Caroline, anchored off the shore. So we were bombarded with the Beatles and the Stones. So I prescribed myself a diet of 1960s pop music, and for 2 weeks listened to the Beatles and the Stones very loudly whilst my housemates were away on holiday in Italy. And my ability to draw returned, not in a flashbang wallop moment, but gradually it came back. For a time, I had to listen to music to enable me to draw. Luckily, I'm kind of beyond that now. And I am a fervent believer, really, in two things. One is the therapeutic power of personally meaningful music, which I think lots of people know about, but maybe people don't understand exactly how powerful that can be, and what powerful medicine it can be, but also in the power of creativity. There was some recent research suggesting that people who took part regularly in arts and crafts of different kinds gained more satisfaction from those activities than they ever did from work. Now, I was one of those people who was lucky enough to have a job I really enjoyed. But even so, you know, to me, going out and painting and drawing is vital. It's. I used to say to people that if I didn't do it, it was like a part of my brain wasn't engaged. And I hadn't really realized how true that was until I literally lived through having the part of my brain being corroded away. So I think the more that we can do to enable people to take part in creative activities and to continue and to help people, then the better. Because to me, it's not an option. It's not a kind of nice luxury bolt-on. It's it's food and drink and fresh air.
Yeah. Willie, thank you so much. And for the purposes of everybody at home, just as a bit of a recap, that was Willie Gilder joining us today. Willie is a peer researcher, visual artist, a former BBC journalist, and your peer research includes work with University of Edinburgh, the eCred team, Willie, doesn't it? It's the Edinburgh Centre. Now, pardon me if I don't get this acronym correctly. The Edinburgh Centre for Research on the Experience of Dementia. Was that correct? Fantastic, thank you. And we've heard a little bit from David Leventhal, who is the director of the Dance for PD programme and founder of the Dance for PD global programme at Mark Morris Dance. And so we've heard a little bit about the perspectives that you bring to our discussion today. I'm going to hand over to Jonathan, Professor Jonathan O'Riordan now, for a top-line introduction from you, Jonathan. And Jonathan is Professor of Clinical Neurology at University of Dundee, a consultant neurologist, NHS Tayside, and also very luckily for SB is on SB Health's research committee as well. Jonathan, could you please introduce yourself and give a little bit of an overview of your expertise in the area of neurology and your interest and connection to the healing arts topics?
Jonathan O'Riordan is my name. I'm a consultant neurologist, and I've been involved in general aspects of neurology, particularly multiple sclerosis, for 30 years. So I trained at the Institute of Neurology in Queen Square in London. I've worked at St. Thomas's Hospital, Guy's Hospital, St. Mary's, and I've been in Tayside for the last 20 odd years. My main subspecialist interest is in the field of multiple sclerosis, and I look after all aspects of patients' care from initial diagnosis, relapse or remitting MS, to more advanced phases of their condition. And I've been my subspecialist field of interest would be in the field of magnetic resonance imaging and its application to monitoring treatment effects and therapeutic effects. I've been involved in about 25 clinical trials on MS. So that's my clinical day-to-day work is general neurologist, subspecialist interest in multiple sclerosis. And I've been involved with Scottish Ballet and their program for over 5 years now. And it's the most happy and pleasurable involvement of the groups that I'm with. And I can go through what I think are different things, but that's probably, you know, a synopsis of what I do. In our Elevate program here in Tayside, we prior to the pandemic, we had set up a program of classes in Dundee and in Perth, and then it went virtual, and then it's gone back to a more in-physical a program. But I find it fantastic to think of our 80 billion neurons and their 100 trillion connections and trying to rewire them. You know, listening to Willie there, we must be doing something. We must be, you know, locking into something or looking at something that I'm missing in what I do. So I'm a very structural, physical person in the field of Parkinson's. We look at DAT scans. In the field of MS, we look at MRI scans so we can see what we think is going on, but we're not looking at the connectivity. We're not looking at all those connections which are rewiring and remodeling. And I think involvement with this is such a fantastic thing that it's delving into something that we're missing. So you'll have many of the trials I'll be involved with will have their endpoints will be relapses, disability progression, MRI activity. They'll have none of that connectivity, and this is that connectivity. So,
great. Thank you so much for sharing that overview. And that sense of connectivity and rewiring is incredibly interesting. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that soon from you. But in terms of connection and connectivity, what we're really drawing from this week at Healing Arts Scotland is this ability for arts, culture and creativity to connect us all, as human beings, to our communities, to ourselves, to reconnect with ourselves. And some of the discussions that have been happening throughout the week at Healing Arts Scotland have been very much focused on that reduction of loneliness and isolation, and the impact that being lonely, feeling disconnected from your community, what that can have on health and well-being in many respects. As a bit of an overview of some of the other discussions that are happening, we're hearing from the Chief Medical Officer today on the launch of his Realistic Medicine Approach report, his annual report, and the title of it as Taking Care, and the healthcare system really starting to look and evaluate at how it can address the whole being and support the whole being to feel well and live healthier, longer lives. And so, of course, we're all here on this call today because we have an interest in creativity and culture and the arts, and the potential of that to support health and well-being outcomes, and for us to feel whole and connected as a society. One thing that I do want to spotlight was from the Arts and Health Lead for WHO, who's also part of this discussion across the week at Healing Arts, is that, and to quote him, or to paraphrase, certainly, it was around the lines of get these ideas off the shelf, so that when we have research and evidence sitting on the shelf, what do we then do with it? Where does it go next? And so we'd like to have a little bit of that running through our discussion today as well, is that, you know, what evidence do we have? What do we need? But how do we actually take that somewhere beyond the shelf? How do we then move that into action so that people can really, truly feel the benefits of culture and creativity for those living with long-term conditions, but also for society in general? And so this overview of this session today is really looking at how creativity and culture can support brain health, how it can transform our brains, and particularly thinking about people with long-term conditions such as Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis and dementia. And there are areas here of population health challenges and concerns that are represented through the panelists, and myself included, in different ways, and through the work that we are doing in lots of different ways to better understand the needs of people living with those conditions and what matters to them. And so without further ado, I'd like to start asking a few more questions that help us delve into this topic in a little more detail. And in terms of the measurable impact and better understanding what might be happening for people who are living with neurological conditions. So my first question, Jonathan, is to you. And you have talked about real clinical focus of your work, your day-to-day, but that your personal interests and passions are also rooted in creativity and arts. Can you tell us a little bit more about the things that we might not see in somebody that might be living with, say, MS or Parkinson's? What might be happening in the brain for somebody living with those conditions?
So I go to Parkinson's. So Parkinson's is a problem of the central nervous system, and a simplistic level, an area of the brain called the basal ganglia doesn't produce enough of a chemical called dopamine. That's quite a simplistic level, and that dopamine causes the ability to do certain things, and without it, certain things happen. So our ability to initiate movement, our ability to do sort of natural walking, natural coordinated movement will be absent, and the patient will experience an increase in their tone. They'll become stiff, and that stiffness is called rigidity. And they'll also experience a problem with initiation of movement, so they won't be able to walk properly. They'll have a lack of arm swing when they're walking. They'll have a lack of normal righting reflexes. And on top of that, they get a problem with their controlling of movement, so they get a tremor, they get a resting tremor. So these are the symptoms patients experience. And our medical management of these patients is very simple. And all the drugs we have simply replace the dopamine that's lost. So we've got many, many different treatments, but they all do the same thing. They all replace it. Now, we'll obviously have seen patients who've had Parkinson's, and sometimes they experience a symptom called freezing. So they'll try to walk and then they just stop and nothing happens and they're not able to move. So a patient was in my clinic not that long ago, and she tries to leave and then just can't move. And I put a little stick in front of her legs and she steps over the stick, and I put it further on and she steps over that and she steps over that and she steps over that. And if she had been in an environment where there was maybe a checkered pattern on the floor, she would be stepping over these, and she'd be utilizing a different part of her brain. So she'd be getting a visual cue from this line, and then that would be bypassing the basal ganglia.
Right.
And so her normal function is still there, but she's utilizing lots of these other interconnections which are there. So she's got so many connections which are there, but they're not being used because she's stuck going through her basal ganglia, and that basal ganglia isn't working. But her visual cue has bypassed that, and she's able to walk. And I think we listened on Monday to the group from King's, and they produced lots of data which demonstrated that participation in ballet benefits a lot of these non-motor problems. So patients benefit. And why do they benefit? Well, they probably benefit because they're rewiring to a degree. It's called neuroplasticity. They're utilizing visual cues. They're utilizing auditory clues. They're utilizing visual and auditory memories. And they're rewiring. So they're thinking of something, they're remembering something, or they're listening to something, that an experience that they've had from their ballet class or wherever. And in reality, they're able to do something. But why are they able to do something? In all probability, their basal ganglia isn't better, but they're utilizing these accessory pathways. So their symptoms are better, and they'll feel better, and they'll be able to move better. And it's a real finding rather than an imaginary finding. And I think it probably is what Willie was describing. He was describing something positive happening, some rewiring happening. And I think that probably explains what happens to the Parkinson's patients when they participate in this, that they're utilizing pathways which are innate, they're there, but they're switched off. Or they're not being used, they're being bypassed, and they're going along a certain way. But when you participate in something, you utilize or you bring together things that just aren't turned on. You know, there's so many pathways there. MS is slightly different. So MS patients have either got relapses, or they may have a progressive form of MS, and some patients have progression with relapses. But in essence, the type of MS they have. And a lot of patients may experience symptoms. So the symptoms can be sensory symptoms. There could be tingling, numbness, pain is a very typical symptom. They may experience motor symptoms, and they're slightly different than the Parkinson's patients. So they've got problems with spasticity. It's called velocity-dependent increase in tone. It's a slightly different increased tone. And they may have bladder problems, but they may also have overwhelming fatigue. And these are very complex symptoms, which may be there some of the time. They may be worse in the morning. They may be worse in the afternoon. They may be worse for no particular reason. They may be worse because it's too hot outside or it's too cold outside. Or they may have had a stressful time, or they may have a lonely time, and symptoms become manifest. Or certainly in females, they may be hormonally related, so around the menstrual cycle or the menopause. And these symptoms can be there, and they're separate to the relapses. They're separate to these things we can measure. So I measure things on a scan. I measure lesions, we call them plaques. But I might miss the sort of variability in the symptoms. And I found that talking to our patients who participate in the Elevate class, that their symptoms are more manageable. Their symptoms are less troublesome. So their pain is better, they feel better. Now, they might feel better because they're participating in something which is positive, happy, collaborative. I prefer the live one rather than the virtual one, but you know, the live participation in music that's generated by something. And their symptoms are better. Now, I've no doubt that their scans will look the same, but why are their symptoms better? So they may be better because they just feel better. But they're probably better because there's utilization again of neural networks which are kind of are kind of being readapted, or you know, there's so many. As I mentioned earlier on, we've got 80 billion neurons. We've got 100 trillion connections. So we're doing something.
Yes.
You know, we're rewiring and in a positive way rather than a negative way. So we're probably reinforcing something that's positive. So a negative symptom becomes less. Rather than
Thank you so much. That's so wonderful. Thank you, Jonathan. And that was a really interesting overview of or insight into some of the factors that are really at play here. And you touched on so many interesting things there. And from my understanding then, that the brain's ability to utilize other areas, if perhaps one area or region of the brain perhaps isn't working quite as it used to, that there is still capacity in other regions of the brain to learn new ways of being and to responding to instruction and to cues and to almost re-educate themselves to find new ways of inhabiting this world that they are in. And actually, you talked about dopamine, the dopamine production as well in the basal ganglia structure. There have been challenges around that. And David, I would like to come to you for this next, just to follow on from what we were hearing from Jonathan. You know, are there other ways that you can think of that might support feel-good chemicals and production of chemicals in the brain, but also maybe some of the tools and strategies, because we did hear, Jonathan, from you around placing something on the floor to give a bit of a visual cue to almost reroute the brain into responding through different stimulus. What are your thoughts on that in terms of the work you do in Dance for Health, David, in Parkinson's?
Well, it's great to hear the sort of the model of what we think is happening in the brain in terms of new pathways. I think we certainly know in music research in particular that music has a way of integrating parts of the brain that might not necessarily be working together in our daily lives without music, when we're just navigating around the world. But when we put music on, it starts to integrate different parts to work together to create sort of a synergy that we see in the dance setting. So I'd say music is one of those things that can be an incredible connector in the brain, but we use other elements, imagery, for example, rather than mechanical instruction. So I could tell you to lift your arm to 90 degrees, and some of you will be able to do that. But if I have you imagine that your arm is actually the wing of a swan, and there's a certain quality of movement, what I see in the Parkinson's setting is that people start to hook into their imagination in the service of movement rather than relying on the automatic movement of lifting their arm, which they might have done their whole lives, but that movement might not be available to them. However, their imagination is available to them. And the other thing with imagination is you're kind of going back to it's an imaginative task. So Jonathan, you talked about the technique of if you're trying to help somebody break out of a freeze, have them step over an object, over a line. You can replicate that idea through dance by using metaphor, by using imagery. So lifting your arm or floating your arm like a wing. That, in essence, is doing the same thing because we're hooking into the imagination, which is not impacted by Parkinson's. If anything, people living with Parkinson's have a higher level of creativity because they have to navigate the world and problem solve all the time. So thinking about imagery, also thinking about the social cues that we give in class. So yes, there's imagery, but also thinking about not just putting your arm out, but actually reaching to somebody as you move, dancing together. How does that impact a task-oriented cue in a way that's different from, okay, lift your arm out, okay, reach to somebody across. When I reach for someone across, I'm tapping into my inner desire to connect. And we are wired as humans to want to connect, to want to witness and be witnessed as individuals. And it gives it that much, it gives it a stronger motivating cue,
Yes.
right? To reach to somebody, to interact with somebody. And in doing so, I would argue there are other neurotransmitters and chemicals that are released, because now I'm bonding, I'm connecting. So, and we've seen this certainly in choral groups that sing together, higher levels of oxytocin, you know, the love chemical, where I feel that I belong. I have a sense of belonging. I would imagine, although I don't know if there's research on this, I would imagine the same would be true for dancing together, the sense of entrainment, where we are doing movement together in time with music, with a similar set of imaginative cues in a collaborative way. So I think there are a lot of things that are going on in the dance context beyond the simple fact of motor initiation.
Yes.
It's that sense of, by moving, I'm connecting, I have a shared experience that connects back to me to give me a sense of belonging and connection that I might not otherwise have in other aspects of my life.
Yes. Thank you so much. It sounds like that social connection is really at the heart of so much as well, that creativity and expression. And you were saying, David, that need and desire as humans to connect with others. And so it's very interesting because it's as a creative, being in a creative environment, then it then feels quite removed from that notion of being a patient, and perhaps giving a different sense of identity in the space as well. Willie, I would like to come over to you, and I wonder what your thoughts are on the feelings of identity, and what that identity as an artist brings to you in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I've spent the morning at a meeting centre in New Haven, on the outskirts of Edinburgh. People who don't know, meeting centres are kind of youth clubs for grown-ups, but grown-ups who have signs of dementia or are being diagnosed or in the early stages. And we were making paper fish. And this all ties in actually with an Irish story about hazelnuts in a complicated way that I can't explain now. But you know, there was something about the joining together in a crafting activity, and actually coming out with something, an end product that we all felt proud of. That I think is a very human need that's kind of gone down through history, whether people have been daubing paint on the sides of caves, or making Anglo-Saxon bangles, or you know, taking part in industry. And I think that's all part of being a person, actually, is making and doing. My own making and doing involves watercolors or pastels, and going out and about around the streets of Edinburgh and drawing people in cafes and so forth. I think as grown-ups, as adults, we sometimes lose a sort of sense of that children have of playing and of doing. And it helps to get back to that. You know, children have no issues with joining in with music or joining in with dance or painting. Us grown-ups have, you know, an awful lot of grown-ups have a sarcastic art teacher on their shoulder who's going, oh no, that's not how you mix colours. Somebody in our group today was talking about his art teacher who had described his painting of George and the Dragon as looking like a man selling hoovers on the doorstep. And this is, you know, this has lived with him 60 years later.
Oh gosh.
Which is it's kind of a bit like my experiences of PE and sort of me and movement, which I know has got in the way of me taking part in dance. So yeah, I mean, I just think if we can try and regain a little bit of that childish ability to participate without worry too much, that's all to the good.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you. And yes, I think we probably all have our own stories that we can share from some of those some of those experiences when we were younger as well. But thank you so much for sharing that so honestly with us in this space as well, Willie. David, you mentioned when you gave us an overview at the very beginning about that multimodal approach, and hearing you speak before, it sounds, I mean, of course, no two people living with Parkinson's are the same. And how do we encourage that sense of autonomy and creative expression in a typical dance for PD class, thinking about different needs and personalities and preferences?
We do it very sensitively. I mean, there are several forces at play here, or desires at play. One is when people come into the space, more than anything else, I want them to have creative agency. I want them to know that their voice is important. Their choreographic contributions are important, even if they've never thought about creating dance movements before, or since they were children. And I want them to know that this is a safe space for them to explore that. But the other part of that is that we know that one of the challenges with Parkinson's is the initiation of movement. And so you have these two potentially conflicting elements: the desire to create agency and create a safe space for people to generate movement material, and perhaps anxiety about coming into a space where they're going to be doing movement that's unfamiliar in a space that's unfamiliar. And so a lot of what I do is a mixing of what I call structured movement, where I'm generating material and inviting them to interpret it in their own way, as it feels right for their own bodies, to transpose movement to other parts of the body if there's a particular block or movement that doesn't feel right, to really to start to open them up to this idea that a possibility. Sometimes it's difficult to, as I think about a painting metaphor, it's really challenging to start with a blank canvas, right? Yeah. So what we try to do in the beginning of class is to provide a palette, to provide a frame, to provide a context for the movement work that they're going to be doing. And then as we get into the class, I try to provide more and more opportunities for them to generate material, whether that's through improvisation, co-creation, sharing of choreography. So somebody, Willie comes up with a movement, Jonathan comes up with a movement, I come up with a movement, we start to put that together into a phrase. Should we do it big or small? Should we do it at different levels? And we start to create together. And over time, participants start to generate and foster confidence in their own abilities to do more of that. And so I always try to have a balance, but there are also people who really don't come to dance class to improvise and to choreograph. They're there to learn steps. They want to become better dancers, and they think that the way to do that is and so again, it's really trying to create an experience that is enjoyable and comfortable for all types of learners, all types of creative individuals. Yeah. I mean, I'm coming from a context, dancing for Mark Morris, where I didn't get a lot of opportunity to make up my own movement. My creative imperative was to interpret that movement in my own way, for my own body, still within the constraints of what the choreographer wants, but to make that movement mine. So a creative artist can be a generative artist or an interpretive artist, and sometimes both. And I try to bring and invite both of those approaches within the class. And I will say just one more thing. Cognitively, I think both are really important for people living with Parkinson's. So we know that one of the things that starts to go away. Parkinson's is a movement roadmap, sort of blueprint for sequencing, movement A followed by movement B followed by movement C. The dance is one of the best ways that we can sort of retrain the brain to think in terms of a sequence, to start to conduct what we call motor planning. So how am I going to get from point A to point B? I'm going to think about that choreographically. And so in class, we can practice through structured choreography, the sort of patterning that people can then take into their everyday lives and say, well, in class, we did 8 counts of walking, 8 counts to turn, and then I did something else. And so that pattern, which we do through practice movement, rehearsed movement, is valuable. But life isn't always choreographed. So sometimes you come up against situations where you have to improvise in movement. Think about walking on a busy street in Glasgow, right? Sometimes you have to move to one side to avoid hitting somebody. You have to move to the other side. That is movement improvisation that we can also work in class. So I think both of those skills, structured patterning and spontaneous improvisation, are valuable to work on. They're valuable for the brain. And so we try to incorporate both. And they also appeal to different kinds of learners. That's a long answer, but I hope that helps sort of contextualize.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much. It really explains it in such a clear way. Thank you so much. And I think that you're absolutely right. It appeals to a whole range of learners, and that is so important that this work is person-centered, because yes, no two people are the same. We're all very unique. And I was really interested, as you were speaking then, thinking back, Jonathan, to how you've outlined everything for us initially and the references that you made to Scottish Ballet's programmes. Curious to know, as a neurological specialist, as a neurologist, as a professor of neurology, why you feel confident and why you refer people into our Dance for Health programmes. What is the rationale for you into making those referrals to us?
I think participation is important. I think what David outlined there, the classes probably make people come out of their comfort zone to a degree, make people or enable people to do something which they wouldn't normally want to do or do. And it demonstrates to them that they probably can do more than they might, that there are things that they'll be able to do, and that this is a very positive environment. So I got into it because my daughters did ballet, and I think Scottish Ballet were probably trying to engage into the community, and so as part of that, you were looking at different areas. So I got into it by default, and the more I got into it, the more I saw that this is totally alien to what I normally do. So I live in a very fixed world. I live in a very black and white world where I see somebody, I examine somebody, I listen, and I deal a lot with certain time points, certain events. So I deal with relapses, deal with progression, deal with you know, the what we see on scans and things. So that's a very fixed environment. But I don't deal with all these other things. Do you know that David was describing there? Listening, participating, watching, thinking of something. Do you know, thinking of a movement. So I'm forever asking patients to put their arms out, but I never ever until tomorrow have asked someone to pretend they're a swan and bring their arms out like that. So I may do that tomorrow. I haven't done it today. But I'm forever asking patients to do that. So part of my day-to-day regime will be asking a patient to walk, asking a patient to, do a tandem gait, and then I'll be asking them to do certain movements, but they're my movements. Do you know what I mean? And I'm a fairly fixed person, so I'll be grading those movements. So can they do them or not? And if they can do them, what am I going to give it? I'm going to give it 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. But I may be doing it completely wrong because you know, I'm not asking the right question. I'm asking them to do something which maybe they can't do, or maybe they can do, and I'm not getting at it. So I think this is a different way of looking at things. This is a more collaborative, more engaging, more. And when I go back to the word happy, you know, generally, the people involved have a positive predisposition. And whatever the problem is, there'll be a positivity about it, and there'll be a different way of looking at things. And you know, the outcomes may be different, obviously, for individuals, but utilizing the arts and utilizing the visual cues and utilizing the music and utilizing everything, I think has a positive outcome. And how you define the positive outcome, you know, people probably feel better. People probably, you know, their symptoms will be better, and that's all positive. But positivity is one of the things I take from it.
Thank you, David. Do you want to come in with something there?
Yeah, I think that's
it. To Jonathan.
Yeah, an incredible comment. That got me thinking about the bidirectionality of information in our between brain and body. But we are also sensory beings, and we get senses that feed back into the brain, and we get that sensory awareness through all of our senses, obviously touch, sight, hearing, but also through movement.
Yes.
And one of the things I see, and this goes back to Willie's comment about, you know, if we could just think back to the way that children play, if we could just think back to the way that children move, and the richness of that movement vocabulary as we get older, with or without a neurological condition, but just as adults, our movement vocabulary becomes more and more limited, right? There's certain things we do and a lot that we don't do anymore. We don't jump typically, unless you're a dancer, right? Or an athlete. We don't jump, we don't do fast turns, we don't move with different qualities. We just have the things we do. We walk, we sit, we do a lot of sitting, maybe a little typing, maybe a little cooking. One of the things I think that dance is particularly good at is rebroadening the motor palette, movement palette. So people are actually doing movements that they either have never done before or haven't done in 50 years. And this is more of a question than a statement, or maybe a hypothesis. What does that richness of movement do for the brain? How does it stimulate the brain in ways that actually go from body to brain rather than just brain to body? So obviously the brain is initiating that movement, but there's information that goes back into the brain through this sensory experience of moving in different dimensions and moving in different amplitudes and moving with different qualities. And how does that impact our brain health over the long term? I'd love to see some work on that, because again, I think dance is unique in this way, in that it is such a rich salad. You can think of it in food terms. You know, I think for a lot of adults, the movement equivalent or the food equivalent is sort of like, I only eat potatoes and bread, right? But with dance, it's this beautiful multicolored salad.
Yes.
Of 20 different ingredients that you otherwise don't really have access to. If you were to kind of look into a dance class over the hour and write down each of the different movements, it would probably be 100 different movements and different qualities that we're playing with. And I'm really interested in how that actually feeds back into a person's lived experience and what that means. What does it mean to have this rainbow of colors again in your physical ability?
Wonderful. I think that's such a beautiful way of thinking about it as well, a rainbow of colours. It's a real palette. There's a real palette there, and it brings texture and individuality as well. And I think it's also making me think, Jonathan, about what you said about what can and can't be, what people can't do and what people can do. And I think what you frame, David, is a real asset-based approach, whereby there is a rainbow and a spectrum of flavours and textures within every class that people can access at their own level, but it really celebrates what people can achieve for themselves within that space. And I think that's something that's really special. That's something that medicine absolutely has a huge and important role to play in all as well, but perhaps that isn't something that medication in itself can provide for people, and that there are other ways of helping to, coming back to what you said at the beginning, add back in what some of these conditions can take away from us. And on that note as well, in terms of variety, and there's a whole palette of offerings there. Willie, coming back to a point that you made earlier, and about your experience with your PE teacher and the comments and the impact that then had on you, hearing that as a young person and those experiences and how they then perhaps influenced some of your feelings towards being in that physical environment. You know, with that, what do you feel would be the barriers to participating in some of these kinds of programs?
I mean, I think an awful lot of barrier. I think an awful big embarrassment is an awful big barrier is the adult fear of embarrassment. You know, the fear that we're going to make a fool of ourselves, the fear that if that this picture we're going to draw is going to look silly, whereas other people are good at drawing pictures, the fear that on Strictly people dance easily, but I've got two left feet. So I think kind of getting over that fear of embarrassment is a huge thing. And just the whole kind of idea that Jonathan was talking about, that, you know, that it's okay to participate, that art doesn't have to be, art isn't something that just has to be done by special people called artists, whether those are visual artists or whether those are dancers or musicians or whatever. And of course, as adults, we do sort of get into these specialisms, don't we? You know, we start being channeled even when we're at school into whether we're into arts or into science or doing this job or doing that job, and into thinking that we are consumers of arts rather than participants in art. So I think there's, getting rid of embarrassment, encouraging people to think of themselves as participants, and a sense of fun. You know, if we can persuade people that taking part in something is going to be fun, then it takes away all the sort of, you know, the idea that this is therapy, because therapy is cold. Therapy is cold showers, isn't it? And we want warm jacuzzis together with our multicolored salads.
That sounds very fun. I'm up for that as well. Lots of dancing and jacuzzis and drawing and painting. It sounds like a wonderful experience. Anything that you would like to add to that, Jonathan or David, in terms of how we help to maybe reduce some of the barriers or perceptions to accessing these creative programs?
There are barriers, aren't there, and perceptions. That's a problem. I don't know how to get by it. You know, I mean, you'll probably notice that the vast majority of patients that will have come from our service will be female. So there will be a very female orientation to participation in our classes, and I don't think there are as many male ballerinas in Tayside. So there is this perception of what ballet is, rather than it being, you know, a dance class for them. You know, there's so that's a sort of a barrier. So the initial perception. Now we get around that by discussing of how what the class is about, by showing them a video of some of the Elevate classes. And I think if they engage certainly with our nurses, they're probably more inclined to go than necessarily with me. But you know, there's that Scottish ballet. Oh, I never do that. You know, I'm a football supporter, so I can't do ballet. But getting them beyond that, and they love it when they go. So I'm just not sure how to. We do try.
Yeah. And yeah, it's about meeting people where they are as well, and really finding out what matters to them. But I do think you're right. I think once we can attract people in and they can make that decision and that choice and feel empowered about that choice for themselves, quite often it has a really positive effect. And rarely do we ever welcome anyone into the space that then doesn't come back, actually. And tea and biscuits are always a good part of that, a good lure. Yes, Nancy.
So just a couple of comments.
Yeah.
So there's one here which saying there's an opportunity here to overcome gender barriers through alternative movement types. Men in sheds are engaging with men through physical activity. They can craft buildings as well as looking at dance forms that aren't seen in male or females. There was quite a lot of comments around why intergenerational participatory arts can be so liberating. Children giving grown-ups permission to play again. We all need what children need. And there's one which was talking about we should definitely celebrate childhood and the imagination and playfulness of young people and older people who allow themselves, enables them to develop neurological connections through movement, music and play. I remember working with a group of preschool children experiencing the 3 times table through waltzing together, 4 times table through marching together around a square, measuring our paces carefully as we went. They discovered more about numbers and patterns in those sessions than any maths lesson. It's natural, but we forget how important it is. I'm just seeing if there's any others. There's another one that's talking about imaginary play and story play with early years children and families and single mums, and how the impact that had on their mental health and well-being. There was one asking whether there are any further kind of reading suggestions or research for dance artists who lead such sessions. Are there any books online or libraries with such information? So I think that's most of the, you just see there's one new one that's come up. I love the tuneless choir. Tunelessness is celebrated, even demanded, with the humour overcomes those critical teacher voices that we all carry.
Yeah.
So
Beautiful
share
comments.
some of the comments that have been coming up.
Yes, really. Thank you so much for sharing that. For anyone that fed in that's such food for thought, and absolutely loving the intergenerational practice as well. David, coming over to you, any thoughts on anything that you're hearing coming through there?
I love the question or comment about really inviting men into different kinds of movement experiences. We certainly experience some hesitation among men who are interested in dance, but they're hesitant. Yes. It's because society has told them that this is not something they should be doing, even though we know medically, scientifically, socially, it's so important and so helpful for regardless of how you identify. One of the things we do talk about is, at least in Parkinson's, and I think this is true for all of us, is really creating an ecosystem for yourself of activities that support and sustain well-being. So I think nobody here is saying that dance is the only thing you should do or painting is the only thing you should do. It's about doing all of it together. And so one of the things that I talk about a lot when I'm giving presentations to perhaps hesitant people of any gender, but particularly men, is I talk about how many professional athletes use dance as a form of cross-training and improvement. I mean, whether you're a boxer or an American football player or a UK football player, you know, a lot of athletes over the years have gone to dance because of how it is specific for certain motor skills. It is about coordination, it is about timing. It's about rhythm. I tell the story of a Ukrainian boxer, his father wouldn't even allow him to start boxing training until he was proficient in Ukrainian dance, because it felt like that would give him the timing and the strength that he would need as a boxer. So I talk about that because sometimes I think, you know, we men think that dance is off limits to us. We're going to do sport and other people do dance, but actually dance is an incredibly powerful movement form. You can think of it, yes, it's artistic, it is an art form, but it's a movement form, it's a movement modality that is incredibly effective at supporting a wide range of movement skills. And then you get all these other benefits. I think one of the things that we're particularly worried about for older adults in general, but particularly those living with Parkinson's, is this idea of isolation. We know from the data that men are more likely to experience social isolation than women. We're more naturally, we sort of withdraw, particularly with a diagnosis. And so I think that's where dance can be even more important. Sometimes we'll just say, come for the social interaction, do what you can, listen to music, that's all great. And over time, of course, they realize how delicious the movement experience is, but they're also being drawn into this social community, which is important for everybody. But there are certain gender-based trends that we see in that dance can help fight against. So
yes, I think thank you so much for sharing that, David. And I think it's quite important that these are all invitations in that space for people as well. There are a range of access points. You outline, come and have a cup of tea, you know, sit and have a cup of tea and a biscuit, or listen to the music. That actually everything that's presented is an invitation. But there are a range of access points, and there's no right or wrong in that space. And we'll often find that in our classes as well, that perhaps somebody is joining our Parkinson's or MS class because their spouse or their daughter or companion has seen this and thought, actually, do you know, this could be really great for you. Come and let's try it together. Let's try it together. And that can quite often be the carrot that brings people into that space. It's something that they can enjoy in an equitable, safe space that they can enjoy together with a loved one or a companion, that it's not about a patient-carer dynamic. And actually, if all they do is come and they have a cup of tea and a biscuit in the social space for the first term, that's okay. That's absolutely fine, because they're still connecting in on their own terms and in their own way. And I think that is hugely important, having that menu of options there. Now, I'm very conscious of time. We have 8 minutes left, and really keen to hear from each of our panelists. Any final takeaways for the people listening and joining from home, from your perspective on what the future of creativity and culture in supporting people living with long-term conditions could be, and or any further research that you think can support this? Willie, coming to you first, and then to Jonathan, and David, finally to you.
I think we have a substantial body of research which shows that music, dance, and other art forms can help neuroplasticity. I would like us to actually use that. You know, I think what happens at the moment is there are a few projects which use it, a few individuals which stumble across it, but actually we don't, in any kind of organized, structured way, go about saying to people, well, you know, here you are, you've got this particular illness condition. Have you considered that music might be an important part of your treatment, that it's powerful medicine? Of course, it would be great to see more research. You know, I particularly welcome research into the redemptive powers of buying a very expensive watercolor paper, because I've just spent a small fortune on a sketchbook. But I think we don't so much need more research as we need to stand loud and proud about what we do and say, this isn't frippery and add-on. This is important and vital stuff.
Yeah, those key messages are so important. Thank you so much, Willie. Jonathan, same question to you. Any final thoughts from you?
Well, it's very hard to be that. I think that is fundamental, isn't it? Do you know, you've got we've got lots of recommendations for various things. So in the field of MS, there'll be guidance, there'll be Scottish Medicine Consortium guidance on certain drugs. But we don't recommend, or we don't suggest the creative arts as a therapy, as something that should be there as well as, and I think we should. So I'm not sure how we're going to get about that. Do you know? I think participation, this concept of sport and dance is something. So I'm going to be using that in my next. I might use it tomorrow. Sort of removal of isolation is a big thing. I'm not providing you with any positive things for research, though. Do you know? Because there's so much done. Do you know? We're people like me are lost in certain finite things, and the soft, I'll call it soft, meaningful things for patients. We don't have that hard evidence, but they're so much more meaningful. Don't know.
Thank you so much for sharing your final thoughts there as well with us, Jonathan. And actually, it's a great ambition to work towards, and a great vision to have some of that the official guidelines and have creative methods embedded within that, alongside the more medical recommendations, perhaps, and guidelines. That's the dream. That's the vision. David, any final thoughts from you?
Well, I think, as you just said, it really is about a partnership between medical professionals like Dr. Reardon, physiotherapists, and others, and the arts and culture field. That we're working together. We're not working in two tracks that are going in the same direction but not related. We are partners with each other. There are certain things that medical professionals can do that we can't. And there's also acknowledgement there are certain things that can happen in the arts and cultural space that are not being addressed by physicians. And so we both have something to contribute to the well-being and health of our communities. And I think one of the benefits we offer in the arts and culture space is really an escape, if you will, from permanent medicalization. And this comes back to that question of identity. And it comes back to something that one of our participants in New York said to me many years ago. He said, what I love about this program is that it's not about what's the matter with me. It's about what matters to me. And we actually ask people living with challenges, what matters to you? Yes, there are things that have been taken away, there's symptom challenges, but more than that, there's a sense of individual agency, there's a sense of empowerment, there's a sense of controlling one's own destiny. And maybe hanging above all of that is what I would call dignity, right? The sense that just because I'm living with Parkinson's or living with dementia, I still have a sense of dignity about how I interact with the world. And arts and culture are all about creating a space for dignity and agency to thrive. We're very much about human thriving, as are medical professionals. We all want people to thrive. We just have different means to get there. And so that's where, at the end of the day, I think it's really important that we come back to where I started, which was that because Parkinson's and other neurodegenerative conditions are holistic and that they affect every aspect of a person's life, we need to address them holistically. Arts and culture play a huge role in helping us define what it means to be human. And when you're living, when you're aging and when you're living with some of these challenges, we need to find activities and pursuits that even more deeply remind us of our humanity, of our vulnerability, and overall our resilience. And that's, I think, what the arts can do as well as anything else, perhaps better.
Thank you so much. That's such a lovely positive note to finish our discussion on today. Thank you so much, Willie, Jonathan and David, for joining, for such a rich discussion, for any of the comments and feedback that have been shared as we've been working through this discussion. Nancy, is there anything that you would like to end on?
Well, I would just add to remember, this is the Healing Arts Scotland Week is on right now. There are other online sessions. There are also events happening all over Scotland. So if you haven't done it already, if you go to the Healing Arts Scotland website, you'll be able to see if there's anything on near you you can take part in. The Arts, Culture, Health and Wellbeing Scotland run conversations like this across the year. So again, if you want to be kept in the loop or you're looking for some of the other recordings, if you sign up for the newsletter, we'll keep you in the loop. And I suppose one of the other things is we'll be working with Healing Arts Scotland in terms of the legacy from this week and carrying on some of these conversations, as we only ever seem to scratch the surface, and they are fascinating. But if we're actually going to look at how some of the changes and Jonathan and Willie would, in Scotland itself, for us to actually get to the point where there is more of this going on, then we still need to have more of a conversation. So hopefully some of those who joined today, I'll be sending out the video to everybody. We will be sharing it. But this is a conversation that's now over to you. Where do we go from here? How do we make it happen? And hopefully we're all sitting in a different place in a year's time. Okay, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to all the speakers. It's been a fantastic session, and hopefully we'll see you either online or in person at some point this week. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.